right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. My name is Enya Lenanya with Iowa State University, and I'd like to welcome you to the Safety First Visualization to Improve Safety Analysis session as part of the Performance Measures track. Hope everyone had a good lunch. We have three exciting presentations that'll definitely help with the digestion and also help keep everyone awake. So without further ado, we're just going to start with our first presentation, utilizing off-the-shelf visualization for crash analysis tool by Skylar Knickerbocker. Mr. Knickerbocker is a research engineer and co-director of the Real-Time Analytics in Transportation Laboratory at Iowa State University. He works primarily in the areas of traffic operations, maintenance, and safety, including data analytics, visualization, and big data management. He assists in the management and support of several research projects for Iowa DOT, Minnesota DOT, the Midwest Transportation Center, and the Strategic Highway Research Program, as well as the Federal Highway Administration. Mr. Knickerbocker.
All right, thanks, Enya. Well, thanks for coming back after lunch and for the last session of the symposium before the closing. Today, I'm going to talk about the Iowa Crash Analysis tool and some of the dashboards that we've been developing to support that dashboard that's being developed by Iowa DOT. One of the things I always like to talk about in all my presentations is data accessibility, and that's a big reason why I got into data visualization, is making data accessible to those who can actually make and have an impact on our safety in transportation, and making it easy for novice users to go and explore the data and understand insights for crashes that are occurring in their area, rather than just being told these high-level statistics that we have at either the national or the state level. So letting them be more data-driven, and through a lot of our dashboards, we are achieving that, and this next level is just taking it to a new tool that's been developed by Iowa DOT to provide more data analytics for those systems. So we've been developing dashboards a lot, and actually at the last symposium I presented on our heavy truck crash tool, which is one where we work with motor vehicle enforcement and the Iowa State Patrol on a quarterly basis to go through all of the crash data for the previous year's quarter and identify locations where they can do more targeted enforcement through a mix-up program that they have. Really, it was kind of the inspiration for a lot of these other dashboards, and the value that we saw in the coordination with enforcement and giving them tools that support them to be able to utilize the tools, and then even for us utilizing it beyond the original intention, which was for the mix-up program, and them using that for any sort of extra enforcement that they're going to do to know what sort of activities they want to target or emphasize for their enforcement activities, or just locations that they could be more prepared for. In addition to the dashboards that we've been developing at Iowa State University, this is just a sample of the Iowa Crash Analysis Tool, or ICAT, that Iowa DOT developed. This is a public-facing dashboard that any user can go in there and query crash data up to the last time the data was updated, which was typically every week. There's a lot of analytics that you can do of querying, seeing where the crashes are, a lot of these crash characteristics on the left side that you can filter on. And then at the end here, I'll show just some very basic charting functionality that currently exists within ICAT, which at this point is fairly limited, and just simple charts showing a single variable at a time. So ICAT, it includes 10 years of crash data, as I mentioned, or 10 years plus the current year of crash data. It's updated on a weekly basis, so any crash reports that have been submitted by an officer within Iowa get added to the tool once it gets updated, typically every Tuesday. In Iowa, we're very fortunate to have good quality crash data. Around, I think, 99% of our crash data is actually geolocated, so we don't have some of the struggles that some other agencies have of locating our crashes. So it's beneficial for us to develop tools like this to really dig into it. In addition to just the basic querying functionalities of the dashboard, you do have the ability to view crash diagrams specifically for intersections to see what sort of turning movement types the crashes are occurring at, or where those crashes are occurring at within the intersection, and then some basic abilities to export reports in a PDF format. Some of the limitations of ICAT is it's really, I would say, more analytic focused. It's just more for querying the data and seeing it. There's very little visualization aspects to it at the current time. A lot of the data outside of the map is showing things like a table of all the information. Some of the PDF reports are basically just tables, which is the way that we've traditionally just been reporting the data. So it's just kind of been the standard practice of reporting the information. And then, as I mentioned, very simple graphics of showing a single attribute at a time for whatever crashes that you've selected, and then there's no interactiveness to be able to click on these attributes and then see how that changes other things, or to dig deeper into those specific crashes, you then have to go in and filter those. And then the last thing is there's also a lot of limitations in the number of crashes. I know it's really small up there, but some of the reports and some of the crash diagrams limited you to 50 or 200 crashes. So if you really want to do a wide scale analysis, it's hard to do those because of some of the limitations that are presented within the dashboard. So with us doing the dashboards and a lot of these analysis outside of them, and the other thing I forgot to mention is every dashboard that we've developed so far has always been for a specific topic. Basically, we say that we're kind of curating the data and the information that's necessary for that specific topic. And we've never generated a general crash tool that's just a general purpose for looking at all crash data like what ICAT has been doing. So what the Iowa DOT wanted to do was bring a lot of these dashboards directly within ICAT in that system, so that we kind of have the best of both worlds. We're directing everybody to ICAT, and they have the ability to do their analysis and filtering crashes and looking at crashes at a given area, and then have that ability to see that information in a dashboard where they can gain more insights and query the data and play with the data a little bit more than what's currently available within ICAT. So part of the requirements for this is Iowa DOT wanted to use off-the-shelf software. They developed ICAT, which is a custom program, and I know we've seen a lot of custom visualizations at this presentation, but sometimes it's not worth the time and budget to do that, or it's a lot more time and budget than what we're probably willing to spend. And so there's a lot of value of using these off-the-shelf products and just figuring out how that integrates into your current systems. And then the other value is Iowa DOT has a lot of others within the agency that are experienced with Power BI. We're developing the first dashboards, but these are things that if additional dashboards are needed or somebody requests them, it's not a huge effort to develop another dashboard for a specific topic. It's simply just creating another dashboard within Iowa DOT, connecting to the correct databases, and then adding it to the ICAT system. So the Iowa DOT really liked the idea of that. Some of the other requirements that they had for this specific program or project was they wanted it to be seamlessly integrated within ICAT. So users can make selections within ICAT, and then that information translates over into our dashboards so that they're not having to go to another system to see that information. They wanted it to be seamless. And then it would be also displayed within the ICAT system and not some export. At one point we talked about just having an export button where you would go to a dashboard and be able to see a dashboard of what you selected in ICAT, but then you wouldn't be able to go back the other way and see the information. So these were kind of the requirements that we set out, and then we all kind of going through how we ended up achieving that, or in the progress of achieving it. So I always like to show this just because a lot of presentations don't go into what data is actually being used and how those connections are being made. So this is just an overview of how we're actually connecting to the data in Power BI, because it presents some challenges in terms of having this live connection to Power BI, which we really hadn't had to deal with a lot of our other dashboards, simply because we create extracts of the data and we display that, and we just keep that data in the system until the next extract refreshes. But because this was a live connection to a separate system, we end up having to have a separate table, which is our top left table here, where every selection, or the ICAT system was actually modified to update an Oracle database. So whenever somebody opens up ICAT, they get a session ID, and then as they start querying crashes within ICAT, it starts populating those crash keys within the Oracle database that we connect to, and then within ICAT, we use that session ID key to then filter the dashboard to show them only that crashes that have been selected in ICAT. After that, everything else in these other 5 tables are all extracted information that we download from the Oracle database every night, just so that we have the latest information that's in the database. The Z shape is just kind of our aggregating table that has every single crash key within the database. We then have all the crash information. We join that to all of our non-motorist data that's getting collected, the person injury information, and then all of the attributes about the vehicles. So this is an actual demo of how the dashboard is integrated into ICAT. So there's a new button in the top that has the dashboard capabilities. From there, I was able to select a drop-down list of different pre-built dashboards that we have. As you hover around, again, everything is interactive, so you can hover and see information and see more details about whatever you're hovering over. I'm showing how we can do selections within ICAT. And if I could actually pause it real quick. Oops. So you'll see whenever the selections are made, it'll change the numbers within the dashboard to represent what crashes have actually been selected within ICAT. You can then expand the view to make the dashboard bigger. You could also pop it out into a different dashboard. This is just showing some of the interactiveness, where if I make selections, I'll circle back. Made the video too fast, can't keep up. So before I play it, before this, I've selected this number right here, which is one of our key emphasis areas for work zones. As I selected that, it then updated the dashboard. So it gives us a lot of that interactiveness. And then we're not limited to the number of selections that you can make. And again, every chart is interactive. So if I come in here and then only want to look at serious and fatal crashes, I can filter those. Again, all the data updates to show that information. Now, if I'm somebody that's in Pottawatomie County, I can hover over that, see what my crash trend is for that specific county or any of the others. And then as you keep scrolling down, you see a lot of other details that otherwise wouldn't be captured within the ICAT system. And then just as a last one, applying one more filter. So now we've got 3 filters at this point that are being applied specifically within the dashboard of work zones, fatal major, and then in that case it was run off the road right. And then again, all the dashboards, all the additional dashboards that are part of the system. One of the things that was added on pretty late in the process as we switched a new safety engineer was originally we didn't have much focus on key emphasis areas. And with the new safety engineer, they really wanted that to be a focal point as part of these dashboards. So regardless of what dashboard we create, they wanted this to be something that's shown on every single dashboard. And these key emphasis areas align with the emphasis areas from our strategic highways research plan, or safety plan, should be safety instead of research. And the symbols coordinate to each of those different key emphasis areas. So we've got things like run off the road in the top right, pedestrians, seatbelt usage, speed, and as you hover over these, it'll give you what the label is for those if you are unfamiliar with those. We show a spark line with each of those so that users can just quickly be able to see, without digging into it too much, what the trend is for each of those key emphasis areas. It always shows up to the last 5 complete years. If you choose more than or less than 5 years, then it'll just show whatever data you selected. And then one key thing is we always cut off the current year from the spark lines, just so we're not seeing the downward trend just because the year's not complete. And then, as I mentioned, all of these are common across all 4 of the dashboards that we currently have built. These are also, as I mentioned before, interactive. So if I do something like this, I can it'll gray out whatever key emphasis area I've been selected. So here I've got both work zone crashes and drunk driving. And then the nice thing that the DOT likes is now you can start to compare for those 2 specific key emphasis areas. How does that trend with all the other key emphasis areas? So we were actually in a meeting, and this wasn't supposed to be the focus of the meeting, but we ended up spending a half hour just clicking through all of these and seeing, okay, well, if we look at just work zones, what other things also trend with work zones? And starting to gain insights that whenever we do and we look at these things both individually, we don't get that bigger perspective of how this is impacting or correlating with other emphasis areas that we have. So it was a big discussion, and the Iowa DOT liked that ability where they can see and quickly compare based on what crashes have been selected. For a lot of our other dashboards, we've typically had different tabs at the top that grouped and categorized a lot of these things. So things like time, crash details, previously would all be separate tabs, and users would be able to click over and across those different tabs to see those specific attributes that are being collected. Unfortunately, Power BI has a limitation where you can't click a chart and that carry over to a separate page. So ultimately, the DOT really they like that interactiveness of being able to make a selection, clicking a chart, and we've trained a lot of the people that have been using these dashboards that you can click everything. Everything is interactive and everything is configurable. So they wanted to keep that ability, but unfortunately, to be able to show a lot of these attributes, we end up having to make this really long dashboard that we haven't released it completely yet, so we'll see what people's perspectives are and maybe modify it in the future if we get a little pushback. But at least so far we've gotten good receptiveness, and we'll see how it goes from there. One other thing I did forget to mention earlier, ICAT currently is pretty limited in what selections can be made. It's typically at only the crash or maybe a few vehicle level statistics. The nice thing about these dashboards is we start to introduce a lot of more person level attributes that aren't currently within ICAT. So some filters or some attributes can only be filtered within the dashboards because ICAT is just limited in the amount of filters that can be applied. So some of the person injury information give more detail and insights in the dashboards than what is currently available in ICAT. I mentioned before, currently we have 4 dashboards that we've been developing as part of the integration within ICAT. We have a general purpose crash dashboard, so for anybody that wants to just see the data that they've selected within ICAT, we've kind of generalized the dashboard to fit those categories and kind of figuring out those key attributes that people would want to see. And then from there, we have 3 other dashboards on non-motorist, speed, and work zone related. Those have additional filters that have been applied to only keep those crashes, even if the user has kept more crashes within their ICAT filters. It gives just a focus for those specific types of crashes based on those additional filters that were applied. in ICAT. And currently the plan is to build out these dashboards for each of the key emphasis areas, so that, again, if somebody wants to look into more details about, say, pedestrian crashes, they would have a specific dashboard that has those details. And again, they have additional attributes for that specific topic that aren't included in the general crash dashboard. Then my last slide here is just talking about some of the challenges, because with using off-the-shelf software, it's not always as streamlined and as rosy as we originally thought it was going to be. The first issue that we've run into is just the speed of querying the dashboard, and especially that interaction of the ICAT system populating data into the Oracle database, and then us bringing that back out to show in the dashboard. We've tried to optimize that a lot. The biggest thing we've realized is we can't do many calculations on the actual data. One thing that we actually originally had for the key emphasis area was a green or red arrow that indicated whether the trend was up or down. We actually ended up having to remove that because that took some calculations that had to be done on the fly, and those just increased the speed by like 2 or 3 times of the dashboard loading. So we try to do a lot of the pre-calculating everything, so whenever the user actually clicks things, it's just showing the data as quickly as possible to them to limit how much time we get the little spinning icons showing up on the dashboard. The other challenge that we faced is just the resources that were needed as part of Power BI. I don't know what the levels are exactly because the DOT's been handling those conversations, but whatever level we were at for Power BI and using their cloud services, we weren't at a high enough level, because just with my testing and the Iowa DOT's testing, we must have ran into some limit where we could no longer access the dashboards. And then if you look at the presentation afterwards, you'll see a little yellow bar at the top that says that we're not at the right compute node or something like that. So Iowa DOTs have been having to work with Power BI to make sure that they're right sizing their Power BI license to meet how it's going to be used within ICAT. And it's not just ICAT, it's how Power BI is used across the entire agency. But this just kind of sped up that discussion of us talking about that more and figuring out right sizing what our Power BI licenses are for Iowa DOT. So with that, I think we'll take questions now, Inya. Yep.
2 quick questions. First, I was very, very impressive. How much data quality or data scrubbing y'all are doing? So is it officer reported, or y'all trying to clean some of that up before y'all put this in?
Nope. So this is the clean, sanitized version of the data. So all of that happens. Iowa's a track state, so I can't remember what track stands for, but it's actually software that was developed at Iowa State University. But every officer, or majority of officers in Iowa, which is why we're at the 99.8% geolocated, use tracks for reporting crash data, and that has a lot of quality checks within it, and we're continuously trying to improve that. One, for example, that we've come into lately is like work zone crashes, not getting the best reporting. So, but after talking with the tracks team, realizing that's not a required field. So a lot of that's done before it actually gets into this database. Yeah.
And then my second question, we do similar work, so I like what you're doing, so I was trying to figure some stuff out. But I'm exactly like you, and we thought this was gonna be great to push out, and when we tried to push it out, I find some of our users either were intimidated because they're like, this is too many buttons, and they don't think of the crash that way, and so they're like, well, give us some training. I'm like, well, how do you train someone to just click a button and do something?
Yeah. Yep.
And then 2 is they interpret the data wrong, and so we're the same way. We try to push things out, but then they don't either want to use it or they interpret it wrong, so then they're always just calling us for data. So I was just curious, with your experience, are you seeing something like that?
Yeah. I would echo all your challenges, but I think one of the things we've really done is we've tried to, not so much at the local level, but at least with Iowa State Patrol and motor vehicle enforcement, actually that heavy truck crash tool that we originally developed, we again, have a quarterly meeting with them where we kind of go through it. And originally how it started was they wanted us to come to the meeting just to run the tool and to them tell us, well, I want to look at just interstate. So you click just interstate so that you can show it. But after, I think we're probably in year 3 or 4 at this point, and about a year or 2 ago is whenever they started coming to the meeting, already having insights for us of what selections they've made. And then I think that just is starting to trickle down. So it's taken some leadership on, specifically in Iowa State Patrol Motor Vehicle Enforcement, of seeing the value and how they could use these things, and then understanding that it's not that hard to just click buttons and apply filters. So yeah, that's kind of been our experience, and just hope that it trickles down to others and be more familiar. I know there's definitely an eagerness for a lot of them to be able to get access to data, and yeah, this hopefully is one way that we can make it easier for them to access it and not have to write up a formal request of, I want to look at this data. And Iowa DOT is pushing them all to the ICAT right now to handle some of the basic queries.
I have two questions. One, how much input do you have in the graphs? You have multiple graph types depending on the data that's presented. Is that something that you directly say? You want these different variables plotted in different manners?
Yep. Yeah, we build how we want to view the data. And I didn't go into it as much and like kind of the logic behind it, but we try to be strategic in how we represent the data, because with crash data, it's complex because you have crash level information, you have vehicle level information, and you have person level information. So there's 3 different things. And so if I just filter fatal crashes and then look at the number of fatalities, like you've got 2 different numbers there. And trying to convey that to the end user, that you're showing 2 different numbers and that they can't just say, use whatever numbers on the graph. So we try to be strategic in how we use tree maps to only show crash level details, and then the bubble charts for vehicle and person level information, and then making sure we label the vehicle and person level information heavily so that people aren't confusing those. But there's a lot of it times is just one driver to one vehicle that's being coded, so we don't have to worry about that as much. But yeah, we try to be strategic in what type of charts we use to make it, again, effective to the end user.
So speaking of people drawing a conclusion in the right way, do you have exposure data that is part of evaluating what's going on? Or?
Not right now. We don't have any exposure data. Not in this dashboard. And it's not even exposure data. But we've, in some other, actually a young motorist crash tool that we've developed, we tried to give a baseline of what the young motorists were compared to the general population. So then you can identify whether what information you're seeing is higher or lower than the baseline of the general population. So if you're seeing a lot more crashes of a certain type compared to the general population, then it's probably something that's more younger driver focused. We don't currently have that as part of this dashboard, but it definitely makes it less possible for people to misinterpret data by giving that baseline. So, but yeah, we don't currently have it within this. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. So before we go into the next presentation, I just have a quick announcement. The closing session has been moved from 3 o'clock to 2:30. So once we are done here, you need to move there, so we give you back 30 minutes. So our next presentation is heavy vehicle safety at railroad crossings, an analysis of the naturalistic driving data and crash report data using data visualization techniques. And we have 2 presenters. The first is Aditi Manke. She's a research associate with Virginia Tech Transportation Institute Division of Freight, Transit, and Heavy Vehicle Safety. She obtained her PhD in Public Affairs from Rutgers University in 2021. Her research interest focuses on travel behavior, travel mode, choice, subjective well-being of people. Her PhD thesis has motivated her to focus on the interrelations between commuting to work and the built environment. At VTTI, with Manke has been involved in various kinds of projects that focus on automated driving systems in heavy vehicles, driver monitoring systems, indoor air quality in truck cabins, and artificial intelligence in transportation policy. She takes a keen interest in descriptive and inferential statistics as well as qualitative research methods and engaging with different tools of data management and visualization. And then the second presenter, Susan Sukolich, is a research associate with the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute Division of Freight, Transit and Heavy Vehicle Safety. She has over 11 years of experience conducting statistical analysis for transportation-related research studies. She has contributed significantly to studies sponsored by both public and private sponsors, including research on driving regulations, distracted behaviors in drivers of heavy trucks, buses, and light vehicles. Driver fatigue and drowsiness, the prevalence, risk, and treatment of sleep apnea, commercial driver detention, and the impact of advanced vehicle technologies on driver safety. She also serves as the vice chair for VTTI Road to Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Committee, which works to create and foster a safe and equitable work environment for all colleagues at VTTI.
Yeah, thank you. Hello everyone. Myself and my colleague Susan, we are going to present a small exploratory research study that involves safety warning systems that are present at railroad grade crossings in United States. So our interest in this topic started from a very small funded research project in which our goal was to create a database using VTTI's Naturalistic driving study data and FRA's highway rail crossing inventory. The purpose to create this database was that in future we could examine the driver behavior of commercial motor vehicle drivers as well as light vehicle drivers at railroad crossings. So while doing the literature search and database search for our project, we came across these statistics that said a story that there were close to 2,100 collisions, 237 fatalities, and around 653 injuries at railroad crossings in the year of 2021. And through literature, we also found that from 2020 to 2021, the crash rate went up to approximately by 12% at crossings. So we knew that certain vehicles like that carry hazardous materials and motor coach buses are required to stop at each and every railroad crossing. But we were interested to see that what kind of like safety warning is there any sort of like indication that will tell these vehicles to slow down, because if there is no certain indication, these large vehicles might end up hard braking, and in these scenarios we assume that that could lead to crash event or near crash event if there is another vehicle following them too closely. So here we have an example of a crash that happened early in this year in summer in Missouri. Here an Amtrak train struck a dump truck, and which resulted in 4 people's deaths. And while the NTSB were conducting their investigation, they found out that the community members residing close to this railroad crossing, they had previously complained about the steepness of the crossing and also how difficult it is for them to navigate through these crossings. And the investigation also showed that the crash where it happened, it was an uncontrolled crossing. There was no warning light or any kind of like warning system present that could tell either the train or the dump truck that a train is approaching them and they need to stop. So just to understand the makeup of the safety or warning features at crossings and how and the driver behavior around these crossings, we looked at 3 data sets. One is our own naturalistic driving study data set, and the other database that we looked at was FRA's crossing inventory and also the fatality analysis reporting system database. So using like visualization techniques, GIS, we tried to examine and explore what kind of like crossing features are there where often heavy vehicles traverse through the most. So I'll just hand over to my colleague Susan to go over the naturalistic driving portion of the study.
So VTTI's main source of data is naturalistic driving data, where we ask participants in a study that usually has some research goal if we can install cameras and sensors on their personal vehicle or their work vehicle for trucks and ask them to drive as they normally would. So it's not a planned experiment where we're usually implementing some sort of treatment. We install the system and then we go away for a few months and come back and collect the data. And the goal there is to collect video data, kinematic data, as these drives are actually happening. We collect GPS data, and it's an enormous amount of data that's collected that way, since the video and sensor data begins when the vehicle is turned on and it continues until the vehicle is ignition off. And so it's not feasible for us to watch all of the video data to understand what's happening as someone drives. And so what we rely on is triggering the data for certain sensor values, or to identify locations of interest and then go into those video clips and view them and understand what the driver's doing and what's happening around them. In this case, we felt that video data allowed the researchers to view driver behavior at railroad crossings, actually see it without reading it in another database, to better understand contributing factors associated with crashes at railroad crossings. And another bonus to the naturalistic data is it doesn't have to be assessed on its own, because we have GPS data, we have information about the fleets involved in their location. We are able to link our data to other databases and kind of leverage information from multiple sources to better understand the topic of interest. So in this case, we were able to match our data to the federally collected crash and rail crossing data sets. And the current study that we'll present today was the data was collected from a study called the Onboard Monitoring System Field Operational Test. In this study, we had 7 fleets participate in 10 locations across the continental US. And in this study, we had some of those commercial vehicles that are required to stop at every railroad crossing, including tanker trucks carrying oil and gas and motor coach buses. And we were also able to use our naturalistic driving GPS data and map match it to identify when our drivers crossed railroad crossings, and then look at what those railroad crossing features are in the railroad database. So in this small study that Aditi mentioned, our first goal was to find when our drivers actually crossed railroad crossings. In order to do this, we fitted or matched our data onto road segments of a proprietary digital geographic map dataset that was done in a previous study. And then we were able to pinpoint using the railroad database. They also provide coordinates of these crossings, and we were able to match our data to the railroad crossing coordinates. And that allowed us to filter down our video data to find instances when our drivers crossed railroad crossings without having to watch all of the data. We used a query to identify when our drivers were closest to a railroad crossing. We filtered out certain distances. We had to pull the name of the road the vehicle was on, because what we found out was there was many instances where our drivers were near a railroad crossing, and so the map matching picked it up as there being some sort of interaction, but perhaps they were following alongside, or a bridge went over and there was no actual direct like railroad crossing and vehicle interaction. So in order to do that, we also had to do a manual review of watch the videos that we pulled, and just double check that this whole query was working the way we wanted to, and in the instances that it didn't, could we just visually check and get rid of the ones that don't match. And then this final verified data set included key variables describing the railroad crossing from that FRA database that we were able to match it to. And so I think we've touched on some of this, but just to go back, our data includes video of what the driver is doing as they drive, but the FRA data, the railroad data, gives us more information about what the features are at that railroad crossing that maybe we can't get from our video clip. So, and that data is all updated using the grade crossing inventory system. So railroad, state, and transit users can update that database with some information about the crossing. And it includes a unique ID for that crossing. And then the FARS data set also includes a unique ID for the crossing if there was a fatal crash at the crossing. So we're able to link these three data sets using the GPS coordinates and the IDs of the railroad crossings. And we'll just show you some examples if I can get it to do what I want. So in this example, I'll pause. Oh, I'll go back. The driver's face is the top corner closest to me. Down below, we can see over the driver's shoulder to see what they're doing with their hands as they drive. In the furthest upper corner, we can see out on the forward roadway. And then the bottom corner furthest from me is the hardest one to understand. These are views going down both sides of the truck. So the farthest corner on the lower is actually like a split view about what's happening on either side to give us some context about what other drivers might be doing. Please play. Okay. And so we can see that the driver is approaching a railroad crossing. This railroad crossing does have some features that are indicating there's a crossing occurring. Our driver kind of takes a hard stop and keeps going. And what we actually see, if we can rewind, is that our driver is required to stop at this crossing, but not every vehicle is required to stop at every railroad crossing. And we can actually see in the lower corner that someone decides they want to just go around the truck as they stop at the railroad crossing instead of waiting for the truck driver to continue. And that could be a huge problem. If our driver's not aware, they could hit that person as they continue moving on, or the vehicle behind might not be aware that there's something going on in front of our vehicle and they've just put themselves in a dangerous situation themselves. So in the lower corner, we'll see there's a white vehicle that just decides, like, I'm not going to wait for this driver to stop. It could be a misunderstanding of how our trucks have to behave. Not our trucks, the trucks participating in our state. Okay, so that's one example of a way we can understand what's happening at the rail crossing using our video data. Here we have a driver driving at night. They approach a crossing that's been marked on the road. And we can see that there is a rail vehicle in front of them crossing over. Our vehicle does make kind of a hard stop, a little harder than would be safe, we would consider safe for a vehicle. There is no, it seems like they've stopped far enough from the train, but it gives us an understanding of how our drivers are reacting when they see railroad crossing information. And in this last case, we have another example of a driver that has to stop at a rail crossing. The vehicles around them do not. And we can kind of see in this case, a truck cuts them off right away. This incident, there was no crash, but it was a close call. Did not happen directly at a rail crossing, but you could see where perhaps the vehicles around the truck might have gotten frustrated with the truck stopping at a rail crossing when it's not expected for that to happen for a light vehicle, and then maybe influence their behavior around the truck as the truck continues. So that black truck that passed them seemed pretty determined to get around our vehicle, creating an unsafe situation for the truck. So these are examples of how our video data can give us a better understanding of what's happening at rail crossings that make put the truck driver in an unsafe position, or is the truck driver getting enough information from the rail crossing to make a safe decision for themselves?
So here we wanted to know, like, see how many the trucks that had participated in the naturalistic driving study, how many times did they pass through any railroad crossing during making a delivery or in their daily route. So here we see that we see like large clusters in the Louisiana and Texas area. Also, we see some cluster of like movement in North Carolina and in New England. And we also noted that there were certain trucks that had made like multiple trips crossing railroads during the day, and we assumed or we think this may be the case because the fleet service was located by railroad crossing. So these trucks, for every delivery they have to make or while they're coming back from the delivery, they have to cross the railroad. So we were kind of interested in looking at the vehicular traffic of what's happening, like how many vehicles or how many trucks are passing through these railroad crossings per day. So here we have like average estimated percentage of trucks that pass through railroad crossings per day at state level. So we have like certain this we have mapped just using the matched data set that we used for using NDS data and the FRA data. This is not the entire FRA data. We were also interested to know, like, apart from trucks, like just the total number of like vehicular traffic. So we have here like sum of AADT by per day passing through the railroad crossings by at state level. So imagining that there are like so many vehicles crossing through the railroad crossings every day, we wanted to see like what is the safety system present at these crossings. So looking at how many number of like crossings had traffic signals that controlled crossings, you see like that majority of the crossings at state level, they do not have any signal that controls the crossing. We also wanted to see, is there any like traffic signal preemption, like is there like a simultaneous preemption or an advanced preemption. We again see that most of the crossings at state level had only simultaneous preemption and not the advanced preemption. So the difference here is that in the simultaneous preemption, the traffic signal operator gets to know that a train is approaching when the advance signs go off, and wherein in the advance preemption, the traffic signal operator already knows before the active signal goes off that the train is going to approach, and that they have to like start the signaling that the train is approaching a crossing. And so the vehicles traveling through that road know that a train is going to approach and that they need to slow down or they need to stop. The other safety feature that we wanted to look at was the average maximum speed for vehicles while crossing while traveling through the railroad crossing versus like the average minimum speed that is required while passing through the crossing. You see like a lot of variation in that. So in our matched data set, we couldn't find like a lot of safety critical events. So we were interested and curious to know like how many vehicles every year they are involved in a crash that occurs at a railroad grade crossing. So we looked at FAR's data set for the year 2020, and we have here like total number of vehicles that were involved in a crash at a crossing by state. So this includes like heavy vehicle, light vehicle, like there is no, we didn't filter out any vehicle type for this particular graph, but we were interested in knowing were there any heavy vehicles involved in a crash for the year 2020. So we filtered out the vehicle weight, and we looked for vehicles that weighed beyond like 26,000 pounds. So when we filtered that, when we put those filters on, we saw that there were 9 crashes that involved a heavy vehicle, and these 9 crashes happened at a railroad crossing where there was no traffic signal that controlled the crossing. We were interested to know more about the environmental condition during the time of crash, and we were interested to know did light play any factor. So we looked at the light condition. So 5 crashes happened during the daylight, whereas only 2 crashes happened during nighttime when it was dark. Supposedly, there were no street lights present, so the heavy vehicle didn't know that they are approaching a railroad crossing. We also wanted to see what was the weather like when the crash happened, because as we know, heavy vehicles take longer time to come to a complete stop. Especially it's hard for them to come to a complete stop during bad weather. So we see that 4 crashes that happened, the weather that day was clear, and for 3 crashes it was cloudy. We couldn't find any information on weather for 2 crashes. So we were interested in the driver behavior aspect as well, and we wanted to see what was the pre-crash movement of the vehicle. We found that in 4 instances, the heavy vehicle was trying to go straight while passing the railroad crossing, and assuming that they didn't see the train approaching, or they thought that maybe they could have they could have made it before the train approached them. So since the crash happened at these railroad crossings, we also wanted to know what's the percentage of trucks that often cross through these railroads, and we see that in Illinois it was 24% of trucks pass through that particular railroad crossing. And it was surprising that even though there are large number of trucks that pass through that crossing, crashes still happen. A crash still happened at that particular crossing. So that just makes us research more into it, what factors play into this in these crashes. Do we need more safety systems present at the railroad crossings? Do we need enforcement or any outreach that educates people how to safely drive through railroad crossings? So this exploratory study just made our assumptions more strong that we need to look more into this. So at this point we just looked at the state level, but going ahead we want to look at local, at the county level or at a regional level, not just looking at the aggregates, and go much deeper into studying why these things are happening, what is the behavior of people while driving around these heavy vehicles, and also while especially crossing the railroads. There were some limitations, we had difficulty in matching our NDS data with the FRA database. So we are looking to include more data set, not just look at FARs and NDS, but have FARs, NDS, and even FRA's incident reports, because FRA also has their own incident database, but it only includes crashes that occurs with a train and not any other, just between the vehicles. So for future research, we are looking to go deeply at the driver glancing and also analyzing behavior of other vehicles as well. Questions? Thank you.
Did you see any specific impact of the railroad properties that you got from the railroad data on
No, so the so we looked at the crossing inventory, and we only looked at like whether the crossing had any traffic signal. Were there like did they have like pavement markings, like did they have stop lines or a symbol that tells people that they are approaching a railroad crossing, but no particular information on what was like, yeah.
So I have a question on the crashes that involve heavy vehicles, the ones that happen in the dark, dusk or dawn. Did you kind of look, was it like fatigue related to any of that?
So that is going to be our next step in our research. We are going to look into these particular crashes and see were the drivers distracted, was there any kind of like driver impairment, to understand more why these crashes are happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our final presentation is on the visual analytics of freight safety, a perspective of truck traffic along highways. And we have Berres presenting, the research, and Berres is a research scientist in the Computational Urban Sciences Group at Oak Ridge National Lab. Their core expertise lies in data science, visualization, large-scale data workflows for urban applications such as traffic, buildings, and population dynamics. And they received a PhD in computer science from the University of Kaiserslautern, Germany in 2015, and has 10 years of experience in visualization fields. Dr. Berres.
Thank you. All right, so first of all, thanks for having me. I'm going to be talking about freight safety, mostly as it relates to freight vehicles parking along ramps or any other places. Basically, taking a look at where are freight vehicles resting overnight, and are those good and safe places, or are they maybe not that? So, as you probably know, trucks are very important to delivery in the US. They actually deliver about 90% of the freight value. And according to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, just within 2020, there were about 5,000 large trucks involved in fatal crashes, and over 100,000 that were involved in crashes that resulted in injuries. 10% of the crashes that resulted in involving trucks were because those trucks were parked on the shoulder or on the side of the road. So that's a pretty substantial percentage. So if you take 10% of the 100,000, which I am not sure if that included the fatalities or not, but over 100,000. So if we take 10% of that, that's 10,000 accidents that may have happened because of a truck being parked in an unsafe location. So it's definitely something that we're very interested in addressing. The numbers, I should note, have been steadily decreasing over the past couple of reports that were put out by the FMCSA, but you know, if we can reduce it more, that's even better, right? So the problem here is, though, that drivers are in a little bit of a conundrum trying to optimize. So they want to maximize their driving time because that's how they're getting paid. They need to get their goods to wherever they're going. They're also required to comply with federal mandates, which are mostly there to, you know, keep things safe. So they're required to take breaks after specific numbers of hours that they've been driving. Short breaks enable them to do less additional driving than long breaks and all that. They have maximum hours for like a set period of time. And the problem is when they hit the end of their maximum time they're allowed to be driving, they're not necessarily anywhere near a good place to rest. So along the way, they have to make that judgment call like, well, do I risk driving another 50 miles or whatever and then not find parking, or do I cut down on the distance I'm driving today, on the time I'm driving today, and potentially lose money over it? Or do I park in an unsafe location which breaks the rules and risks their safety? But that's kind of the third option. They can just keep going until the time is up, and if there's no parking spot, they just park right there on the shoulder. Or, well, they might be getting to a rest stop, aiming for a rest stop. It's perfectly located, but it's full. Sorry about that. Forgot to put an animation on that. But yeah, so this is really what we're trying to look at, and the data that we have is from electronic logging devices. Those were put in many trucks. I think they're actually required to have them these days. And it has its positive sides and it has its negative sides. On the positive side, having those automated logging devices, because the drivers can't cheat, is supposed to increase safety, because now they're forced to comply with the safety regulations, because if they don't, they might get fined, and there's proof of their cheating and driving longer than they're supposed to in the automated record. However, it also decreases safety because, well, now they're definitely not able to just say like, oh yeah, I totally drove 10 hours. Because at that point, like, if they want to charge for 10 hours, they have to drive for 10 hours, and then they might be in that situation where there's just not a safe place to rest. So yeah, drivers end up parking on shoulders and off ramps due to a number of reasons. But what we're trying to find out is, where do they do that? And is that maybe because there's not enough parking at the available rest stops, or is it that there are just no rest stops nearby? Or as Nicole said in the freight session yesterday, is the configuration of the rest stop maybe inappropriate? Is it maybe that they can't get into the parking spots, things like that? So we're just trying to figure out, well, where are they parking? Where could they be parking? And then our plan is to take that to the DOTs and be like, hey, look at that. It's up to you to solve it, but here's our data, or here's a tool where you can explore it yourself. So the freight data source that we're using is from FreightWaves. They're a company that's, according to their little blurb on Google, focusing on global supply chain market intelligence. In any case, they work with a lot of different freight operators, mostly bigger commercial fleets. They are not at liberty to tell us who exactly, but they collect data from inside the tractors as well as inside the trailers of some of those. Between those two types of data sources, which they have 2 data sources each, they cover about 25% of commercial traffic, according to what they've told us. But the data that we're looking at is really just the inside the tractor portion, because we're interested in duty status, like, are they actively driving, are they sleeping, are they on duty, off duty, things like that. And then from the tractor data, only one of the 2 data sources actually had that duty status. So we're only looking at a subset of the data that FreightWaves provides us, but they're generous enough to share it with us. So we're really happy to work with it. Did I duplicate that slide? Oh no, that's just an error. Okay, yeah. So that's the one that we're working with. Of course, we also need some contextual data. So beyond a whole bunch of different types of base maps, which have different pros and cons, we used a road network that just has the major roads on it to do some preliminary filtering. We're really trying to look at highways here. We don't need to be looking at all truck locations if they're in the middle of nowhere near a highway, so we put an initial filter on that just to cut down on the big data that we're trying to display, and really focus on the data that we're actually interested in. We also used data sets for rest areas and truck stops just to have those locations. Unfortunately, both of those were point data. I would love to have polygon data if anyone knows where to get that, because then we can do point and polygon testing. Whereas if you look at proximity, well, first of all, what do you use as your distance? Like what distance from the truck stop location point is appropriate, and then whichever number you choose, either you're going to miss trucks that are actually parked at the truck stop, or you're going to include trucks that are parked nearby, but there wasn't any space, so they're still parked in an unsafe location. So with the point data, we unfortunately weren't able to do that step. That was something I was really excited about. But we still include it as at least contextual data that you can look at, and it has information on how many trucks you can park at the truck stops, for example. So it's still useful, it's just not as useful as it could be. We also included a layer of incidents that's just for Tennessee, while everything else is for the entire nation. That we filtered down to incidents that could plausibly be related to trucks. They don't have a tag for trucks in there, unfortunately. But yeah, there are some incidents, like it's not actually while driving, it's related to a vehicle that's on the side of the road. So there are some filters in there that, or some variables in there that we were able to filter by. It's pretty liberal. If there's any doubt, like if it's unknown, we kept it. So we included a lot of incidents on that layer that maybe we don't really need, but we also didn't want to exclude any incidents. Yeah, so here are the truck stop locations for the visualization. The size of the circle corresponds to how much parking we have. It's not linearly scaled. We try to keep the areas in some relation to the actual number of parking spots. And then we have some metadata for each of them. So, for example, here it has the number of truck parking spots. This is one of the large truck stops. They're pretty close to my home, so I'm fairly familiar with it. Many gas stations. But yeah, so it has the parking spots, some other data that's potentially relevant, like which exit it's on. And overall, this data set has a little over 2,000 truck stops, primarily in the US, a few along the borders in Canada and Mexico. And yeah, I think I've said everything else, but that is provided by USDOT Open Data. So thank you to USDOT for having that. For the rest areas, we have about 3,000 throughout the entire US. That is crowdfunded, not crowdfunded, crowdsourced data. Anyone can update that. So legitimacy may be a little bit more questionable than USDOT data, but it seems to be maintained reasonably well. And again, we have some metadata that you can pull up, most of which is not super interesting, but a small amount has something about trucks in it. Sometimes it says truck or no truck, but I wasn't able to find a legend saying what all the options are. But we might be adding maybe some icons or some more differentiation so you can filter for that specifically. Now, the moment we've actually been waiting for, actually looking at freight data. So we have a pretty simple dashboard, just letting us filter by duty status and looking at some additional layers. And whichever truck locations are visualized, the pie chart will correspond to that. We have a live demo in a little bit, so I just want to show you the dashboard the way it looks because the backup slides only have pictures of the maps. So you can see a little bit more. This is the incident data, and let's see, I can get the mouse over there. Yeah, so this is the kind of metadata that you can get with that. So the relation to first junction, for example, is one of those parameters that we can filter by. So it's not at a junction, but the first harmful event was related to a parked motor vehicle. So that is definitely one of those parameters that we're very interested in. It's along the roadway, so that tells us it's a parked vehicle that's not in a parking lot. So I need to find my mouse again so I can actually click again to continue with the slide deck. So looking at the different duty statuses, I'm going to talk about 4. The 5th one is waiting at an oil field, which doesn't seem to be very relevant to our research question here. But basically, on duty, we show as little green trucks. That means they're on duty, but usually not actively driving. Sometimes you will find these on roads. Sometimes you, quite often you will find them at loading docks or maybe in parking lots when they're just like taking a quick break. Like when they're stuck in a traffic jam, you sometimes see some switching between on duty and driving, or possibly even off duty if they're basically at a standstill. Sometimes there are some frequent changes in that data. Anyway, actively driving, we show in blue. Those are typically on roads. Sometimes you do see them as driving in a parking lot. That's typically because the timestamp is for when they change status. So they start their break and then they start driving again. So that's where that's coming from. But they might also actively just be driving to a location in the parking lot or at a loading deck or whatever. Off-duty, we typically find in parking lots, but also relatively frequently in traffic jams, or like at least on the highway. I mean, they could also be on the side of the road. So that's the question there. Are they on the side of the road? Are they actively just in a lane, but stopped and messing with their duty status? You will see them on the side of roads. You sometimes see them in residential neighborhoods, which isn't great, but it's better than when they're parked on a shoulder. And then sleeping as a status is specifically referring to sleeping inside the vehicle. So if they're sleeping at a motel, they would be considered off-duty, not sleeping, for the purpose of tracking here. This, again, mostly in parking lots, sometimes near loading docks, but we also do see them on the side of the road and in residential neighborhoods and on off-ramps, generally places we don't necessarily want them to sleep. All right, I'm gonna cross my fingers that this is gonna work. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Well, all right, so we have our tool here. We're gonna look at Tennessee because that's what I'm most familiar with. Because we do a bunch of work in Tennessee. So you can zoom in, and for the purposes of figuring out where you're at, I very much like this layer, but you can't always zoom in far enough to actually see what's happening. So let's try imagery. Oh, the Wi-Fi is slow. I am not on Wi-Fi. Okay, that explains. Wait, yeah, I should be. No. There's a visitor, not Wi-Fi. There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. All right, so you can see vehicles along the road driving or on duty. This one is not driving. They're off duty. So they might be stuck in a traffic jam. Do we have a timestamp? Oh yeah, that's about 5 p.m. That sounds about like they might be stuck in rush hour traffic. I can't navigate with dragging on this computer. That's interesting. Usually you can drag the map. For some reason it's not working. So here you see some trucks that are off duty or driving in this little parking lot, and if it would let me drag, it's rendered above each other, but you can also filter to just sleeping vehicles if it loads. I'm going to be patient for a second. I do have the data locally, so it shouldn't take that long, but all right. I'm hoping I took a screenshot of that. Well, it's a different base layer, but same screenshot. Here I filtered to just a sleeping in the vehicle person and people who are off duty, so you can see it a little bit better without the driving vehicles above it. Let's see if it's loading. It is not loading. Okay, well, so much for the live demo, but fortunately I took screenshots. So this here is in Knoxville, and there are two very large truck stops right by the highway. One is down here, one is up here. I think between the two, there were probably about 30-ish or so trucks that were actively located here in this data set. One of those was one I was showing earlier that had 180 to 190 truck parking spots. So they're really quite large, and we can see that a bunch of the trucks are stopping there to sleep, which is great. This is just a little bit further east in good traffic. That's maybe 5 minutes driving, if that. And would you look at that, there are two sleeping trucks parked along the road. So that is definitely one of the points where we're going to point this out to Tennessee Department of Transportation and be like, hey, for westbound traffic, what's going on there? Because just a little bit further, there was a truck stop that they could have stopped at, and they definitely haven't passed it yet. Unfortunately, I can't zoom in because of the picture, but they are on the westbound lane. This is east of that truck stop that I was showing. So they haven't passed it yet. They clearly haven't gotten to the point of, oh, well, I want to park here, but it's full. So they may have run out of time on their time limits or something. Or maybe there are just not a whole lot of good truck stopping options further east. I definitely can't think of any, and I live in Knoxville, so I feel like I would have probably noticed them. Up here, this is actually, like it's marked as a truck stop. It's not like a regular truck stop, but it is some kind of company. They advertise for people who have commercial driver's licenses to come work for them. I drive by there every once in a while. So there's definitely some truck stuff happening there. They have truck parking, a good amount, judging by Google Street View or Google Maps and the truck stop data. So I'm going to show more stuff. Here we have some other examples of warehouses with a lot of trucks around them. Well, that's the same one twice. There's another one that has a lot, and we have this clustering. You can kind of configure how, at which level you want to start clustering. We actually changed that between this screenshot and this screenshot because I decided that I really wanted to see all of the truck locations and their colors instead of just the number overall, because I am interested in what duty status they were on. Anyway, no, that's not the slide I was looking for. Like with the filters here, you can select one or multiple duty statuses.
Can you go back into the screen mode?
I can. I was trying to zoom back and forth between different slides. But yeah, so with this menu here, you can select one or multiple of these duty statuses. So for one of those screenshots, I had selected off-duty and sleeping, for example. You can say, I just want to look at sleeping, or I just want to look at driving, depending on what you're interested in. We're mostly interested in unsafe sleeping locations. But you could use this to look at other things like, oh, where are, whatever. where are trucks at 5 p.m. or whatever. And actually, look at that, I can navigate here. So where do we go from here? We have a couple of other things that we have done on the project. So the trucking data is what we would consider historic data. It's fairly recent. We get the data the day after it happened, but it's not real time, so we wouldn't be able to actually make a real-time system with that. To freight waves, the real-time data is really where their money comes from, so that they don't really want to share, which is fine. But yeah, once it's a day old, they're like, yes, please do research. So, I mean, that's exciting. But here's another thing that we've done in the past, and that was led primarily by my co-author, Hawen, who's sitting over there. So we were looking at radar sensor data along the highway system. They have them all throughout the metropolitan areas in Tennessee. The Chattanooga area, which is shown here, has about 210, 220 of them. And they're placed about every half mile along the highway and give you lane by lane information on speed, volumes, and occupancy at 30-second intervals. So it is aggregated. We took that, and well, Hawen has a hydroinformatics background, so he understands water flow, and we applied a water flow model to turn the static sensor data into a continuous flow model. So it looks like it's simulated, but it is what we call emulated, where basically we're creating flow from those static sensors. I don't think the sensor locations are on here. Anyway, so that is something that we would love to connect with the truck data. We also, on the project, have some work on looking at real-time video feeds. Because as much as we have those roadside sensors, and theoretically they're supposed to give us the length of the vehicle, unfortunately that feature isn't working. And we wanted to know how many trucks there are among all the vehicles, because we know there are 20, for example, but we don't know, are they trucks, are they cars? So we have some work that's being led by Joel Brogan of ORNL and Nalan Rath Guba of NREL, and they're looking at doing video detection of those trucks to generate those numbers for us. That is currently in progress. We're hoping to have real-time access to that soon to actually play with it. But that is something that, especially with maybe in the future working more closely with freight waves and working with the real-time data, I think would be a valuable combination, because while they have a lot of it, they only have about 25% of commercial traffic, so there's definitely more information to be had. We also have some work on incident detection. If we could give the truck drivers an early warning of, hey, there might be an incident going on, that would certainly also be something that we would be very interested in. And I think we're almost out of time, so I'm gonna switch to this slide here. Thank you to our sponsor, DOE Vehicle Technologies Office, for funding this work, and to Chattanooga and Tennessee Department of Transportation for their partnership on this project. And thank you to FreightWaves, obviously, for providing us with this very interesting and cool data. And also thank you to my co-authors, Hawen and Ross, who I don't believe is here this year. And with that, I am open to questions. I don't know who wants to go first.
I just have one question. For example, if the truck has some mechanical issue, they park on the shoulder. It's not just sleeping just because they have some issue. How did you exclude that part?
So that would be displayed in the duty status. So they would probably be on duty, but on the side of the road, as opposed to sleeping, which has a different duty status. So that's how we distinguish them. So if they're just on the side of the road because of a mechanical issue, it's not really something that we can solve. We could hopefully get them help quickly, but it's not really something where we can tell the Department of Transportation, like, hey, trucks break down here all the time, do something about it, right? That's really with the freight operators. Yes?
So, are you showing just yesterday's data on any given day, or are you aggregating that to try and get some
So this is what I was showing here is it's less than a year, but more than half a year. It's January till almost end of October. I think 30th or so. Just aggregated into one data set. But we did cut down to truck locations close to highways just to cut down on the amount of data. Because if you look at a single day, it's just not that much to look at.
So are you then showing the duration at each location as well?
Yeah, that's part of the pop-up. Was this? Yeah, here's one of, oh, sorry. So up here you have the occurred at and ended at, and that gives you the start and end time for the status that they're in. So in this case, they started sleeping at 6 a.m. and ended at 6 p.m., which, okay, if they like driving at night, that's good for them. I guess it's less traffic. But yeah, so that is how we're tracking that. And did you still have a question?
Yeah, I was just sort of curious, is there a perspective on this to look at sort of network screening, like looking for places that are sort of problems at a network level or a state level?
Yeah, so that's what we're hoping to get towards. We're currently looking at finding data sets that actually have polygon data for those rest areas and truck stops, because then you can just make that a point and polygon operation and get the actual vehicles that are parked in places that are safe and the actual vehicles that are parked in places that are not safe. And then you can, use that to annotate the network or just show the inappropriately or appropriately parked vehicles to have that comparison.
Questions? Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'd just like us to just give a round of applause to all our presenters. And also give a round of applause to yourself for your wonderful questions as well. So this concludes our session. Remember that we've moved up the closing to 2:30, so you can feel free to head towards there now. Thank you.